Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the metaverse, welcome to the show. Today, we get to speak with my very brand new friend, Chris. How you doing today, man?
Good. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. And I know a lot of podcasters do like a whole big introduction, but it is way more fun to hear it from the primary source here. No hearsay on this show. So let's kick it off. What we have in store for you lovely citizens today is we're going to talk about Chris's journey, how you got to where you are now, talk about your projects, and then we're going to scope out and talk about the metaverse and crypto gaming as a whole. So it's going to be a lot of fun, action packed, and trying to think of a way to tie the word space pirate into this intro, but it's not working. So I'll just say space pirates will be here soon in the show. So anyways, Chris, welcome to the show. I'd love to hear your story.
Great. Thanks for having me. Yeah. So, I'm the head of SpacePirate Games. And kind of before I got into doing game development and putting a studio together, I kind of have a long history with IT and game development and things like that. So, I kind of started my career off working for NASA and Jet Propulsion Labs. So, kind of got into like the whole NASA space thing, like all that kind of stuff way back in the day. So it's kind of cool. I get to work on the Cassini project, Mars Rover, Stardust. So I got to do a lot of those. I got to do a lot of those projects. That was a lot of
My
fun.
God, that's cool. How did that even happen? Did you just like send them an email like, hey, I'm gonna come work for you now? And they're like, all right, sounds good. Like, how does that even work?
Actually, it's kind of funny. It's kind of like, back in, like back in the day, like, this is kind of like before like before like a lot of like job boards existed on the internet or things like that. It was kind of like the way that IT people kind of got together and got projects and things like that and got jobs. It was either, you were either looking in the newspaper for a job or it was by just word of mouth. And it just so happened that like at at my college, I was working on a project and help building the computer lab. And like networking was like a little bit still bit of the early days. And it was kind of like not not as many people knew networking back then as they did kind of today. And really what you had to do is you had to read the books and you had to figure everything out on your own. And long story short, I basically built a computer lab like by myself. And like word of mouth got around and it was just kind of like, hey, like, like you gotta meet this guy, like you gotta talk to this guy. And sure enough, like one person knew another person, and that person worked at NASA. And I basically started having a conversation with them, and they needed a whole bunch of work done on a whole different bunch of systems and databases and all different things like that. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up working there. So it's kind of cool.
Amazing. So it seems like you really crafted your own skill set here. Like it seems like you had an interest, you kind of dove into a project, you learned by doing that project. Other people heard about that, and then you end up at NASA working on super cool space stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, I mean, it was definitely, a lot of fun. It's kind of a different era of, doing stuff. But, back then it was kind of like, like working on a game and being part of gaming, like we're talking, like the early 90s. So like a lot of the game development and stuff it was all a lot of homebrew stuff. There weren't a lot of like, major game studio outfits back then like they are today. Today you have multi-billion-dollar AAA game studios, and it was kind of like back then there was just a small handful of people building games together, and a lot of it was like garage work, right? So it's kind of like so I knew a lot of those people, and I talked to a lot of those people, and just kind of like kind of grew up like you know, talking on BBSs to, people who like worked at like Sierra Online and things like that. So it's just kind of like, your name kind of gets around in, in those early circles of doing like game development like this. And so it's kind of like, you know, one thing led to another, and, just, on the side, I, talked and networked with people, and I ended up, doing some side work for some studios. And, that's kind of how I got into game development.
Cool. Now, were you a gamer as well? And that's kind of what led you to drift towards that sort of community?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, I've been a long time gamer, going, all the way back to, the Atari 2600, right? So it's kind of like definitely some old school gaming systems. But, I have to say, like, my passion really took off for it, like on the PC side, because it kind of like opened up like a whole new world. So a lot of the games that I played back then were some of the early PC games. So they were like text adventure games, some of the early like click and point adventure games like Monkey Island and things like that. So I've always kind of had a background in playing games and being involved in, in that kind of scene. So yeah.
Cool. I'm interested. I know I'm jumping forward a little bit, but I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this inkling of curiosity. In the nascent stages of that initial game development, as that progressed, are you seeing a similar pattern or a similar cycle or something now in with blockchain and crypto gaming? Like, what are you seeing there?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny that you brought that up, because it's like it's kind of a pattern that a few people have actually picked up on, and it's kind of like you kind of have this weird space right now where it's kind of like you have gamers and game developers, right, who are, really interested in kind of exploring this new space, but they're still kind of learning about it. So kind of what you have is you have people who are interested in the space but aren't game developers. So what they're doing is they're developing games in a very similar fashion how you had a lot of original games being developed back in the day. So it's kind of like, you see the same kind of like early web kind of click and point kind of games, and, a lot of the early text adventure stuff, and a lot of really simple gameplay mechanics that are being kind of used right now for a lot of games. And they kind of have some of the same kind of look and feel. They're like, low resolution, pixelated kind of text. Very heavy on text, very heavy on those kinds of things, because that's kind of the easy stuff to do, right? You don't have to have a tremendous amount of skill set to get a hold of some of that material and basically put it together, and you kind of have the rudimentary, kind of easy, kind of going kind of game for your community, right? And on the other side, you have, like, let's say, very experienced game developers who've been doing game dev for 15, 20 years or so, or they have a hand in some of the game development, right? Maybe maybe they're an artist, or maybe they're on the coding side or something like that, and they're interested in blockchain, but they don't know enough about it to kind of do anything with it. So it's kind of like you have these two worlds that are kind of just starting to come together now, and it's kind of created exactly the kinds of games that you're talking about, right? So it's kind of like we're seeing a lot of the same kind of themes and kind of similar games that are very early gameplay, all those types of things, the kind of click and pointy kind of stuff that that remind a lot of people of some of the early games of the late 80s, early 90s kind of gaming that we're starting to see kind of come out for blockchain and NFT games today.
I feel like it's a lot of people that are just so excited about the technology of like the blockchain. And I feel like for some of the people, it's probably, okay, I want to build a blockchain game. And they get to that point, and then they're like, oh wait, but I have to have a game to build. So then they're like, all right, well, they came to it from like, I want to build a blockchain game, but they don't have a game. So then they're like, all right, wait, let's hack together a game. Like, what's the easiest thing we could do, or like an MVP we could start with, and then we could just to get into the space. Do you think it's like that, or is it more of this is just so technically difficult to actually pull off that they just don't have the funds at the moment, or there's not a way to like feasibly pull it off for just a beginner bootstrap one person studio or a couple people operation?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that there's several aspects to that as to like why we don't see, like a lot of blockchain games kind of flooding, into the market. And it's really because of those things that you mentioned. So, first is like the capital investment, right? In order to have the tools to actually create some of the games today, they're coming down in price, they're coming down. There's more information available, there's more classes available on actually how to create games and do it, use the actual tools that are out there to do that. But it does definitely require a varied skill set in order to put some of those things together. So you may have somebody who's like, let's say, an artist, but they don't know how to code. So a lot of the tools that exist right now, they're coming out with ways to allow like artists to create games using those tools like Unity and Unreal, but they don't know how to code, so they're kind of, they're starting to bridge that gap. And in this space, when we're talking about blockchain, we're talking about NFTs and things like that. That's going to be really powerful because you have a lot of people who are in the NFT space. They're traditional artists, right? So they're not sure how to create a full-fledged, like game, but they've got ideas, they've got concepts, they have stories in their head. They're doing world building, right? And they want to kind of get that kind of creative thing out and get it into people's hands. But it's hard to do that, especially like if you don't have the time to necessarily put into that. So the other thing is that if you've got an idea for how to build a game, a lot of these people are reaching out to other people who do know how to put together a game. But a lot of those people have full-time jobs, right? So they're kind of like, I could do it, but it's a side job, and I have some time on the weekend, and I could probably spend an hour on it here, So it's kind of like, so then that leads into, okay, well, let's go out and get some venture capital. Let's go out, let's do some fundraising, and that's when you kind of see like the mid-maturity phase of a project of somebody who's going out and raising money and wants to go ahead and put together a game. And this is kind of like, this lends itself into kind of like the dark side a little bit of like indie gaming, because some people may remember like when Kickstarter first came onto the market, right? And they first started out about, okay, well, how do we decentralize kind of projects and not have to sell a tremendous amount of equity into something that we've got, and let's leverage the community and let the community fund some of these things, right? And a lot of people know, like a lot of those early Kickstarter projects, they got a tremendous amount of funding, and they didn't have a deliverable. So it kind of like turned into this thing where, when the NFT space started to mature and the blockchain space and the token space started to mature a little bit, you kind of had that shift of, okay, well, let's move this into the space where we think the people are going to understand these kinds of projects and these kinds of things about blockchain gaming. And that's kind of where you've had as well some of these early crypto projects that they may have had a game idea, they may have had something kind of like a concept behind it, and let's say, okay, well, let's leverage the community to do this, and then they in and of themselves have the same kind of problem. And that kind of fueled into a little bit of the narrative of crypto in general. A lot of people, back in the day when a lot of these things started kicking off, 2013, 2014, 2015, the narrative about crypto had a tremendous amount of challenges, So it's kind of like you had people who are kind of skeptical, and the pyramid and Ponzi's and all that. And so a very few amount of projects were able to kind of like break out of that kind of doom and gloom and say, oh, okay, like we actually have a project, we actually have a game, here are the people who are involved, this is what we're doing. And then, you start to have some maturity along that line, that then the community in and of itself starts to mature, and then they can start to identify things that they want to actually get behind, and then start to build a game. But yeah, I mean, that's, you kind of hit the nail on the head there with, why we don't see a lot of, why we don't see a lot of games out there right now. And if we do, they're all indie games, right? So
Totally. I mean, I can't tell you how many projects I've looked at where it's like the website looks really good. You can buy a coin. You could stake like you could stake a coin. You could farm it. And there's all these peripherals, but I'm looking for the play button. I'm looking where I can click and shoot something and like, have a little +5 experience points come up and like, and that's just, it's not there for a lot of projects, which is why I was so excited to chat with you, because I love what you're doing and I don't fully understand it. So I was really looking to like understand, where did the idea come from? Where did what was really the genesis of it, and how did you actually go about building out everything that you built?
sure. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, like back in the day, like we talked about earlier, you kind of have like an idea for a game in your head, right? And you're kind of like, oh, well, I think this would be a really interesting concept, and I think it would really resonate really well with this type of community. So it's kind of like you have some key touchstones about your idea, and you kind of start to go, okay, well, how can I flesh this out a little bit? So for me, I was really interested in sci-fi. I was really interested in space. I was really interested in a lot of different concepts along those areas. As well, there was kind of like some interest that I had with, following like myth and lore, and a lot of like, ancient lost treasures and things like that. And I kind of like had this idea of, okay, well, just from a world building standpoint, what would happen if I kind of like, put all these things together and kind of define a narrative for driving a game story along those lines. And that kind of sort of became a little bit of the genesis for Age of Rust. And, in terms of the world building and building out the characters and building out the storyline kind of behind it, that's where that kind of came out from. And, in the early days, when I had this idea, that the game in my head kind of looked a little bit different than how it looks kind of today, simply because like in crypto, a lot of people were kind of looking for, what we talked about earlier, like a lot of the blockchain games that were out there were rudimentary in terms of like interface. It was, a lot of not even point and click. They were all kind of gambling games. So it was kind of hard to get the concept to people who were into crypto, because there were no blockchain games. Nobody was building anything like that. The earliest kind of game that was out there, were some of like the trading card, kind of games that started to come along, for crypto. And like one of the first ones was Spells of Genesis. Said, okay, well, like we have these cards. Let's just take some amazing art that we have from some really great artists, and let's put them onto these tokens, which at the time they were NFTs, but nobody knew they were NFTs back then, because there was no language around that, right? Yeah. So it was just kind of like, okay, well, let's put it on these tokens, and we'll just, we'll go with it, and we'll, and we'll build out this game. So that was kind of like one of the first early kind of blockchain games. And I thought, well, it's kind of really interesting. I'm really not interested in building a card game, but what I am interested in is taking players on an adventure. So what I did is I put together like a really early proof of concept game, which is basically was just a really easy text adventure, and just that text adventure just alone in the very, very early days of, 2014, and just kind of like rolling some stuff out there with, some art and putting some multimedia behind it, some sound and some other stuff, a little bit of interactivity. And, I had like, 5,000 players just like right off the top. So it was just kind of like, so that was kind of the provable kind of product concept of saying, okay, this is what people are kind of like interested in. the space started to evolve a little bit in terms of like the maturity of the people who were getting into crypto. So the kind of space kind of evolved a little bit. And I started noticing, some of the gamers were also some traditional gamers, and they were going, listen, I love the text adventure, or they had never played a text adventure before, and they were really interested in the concept, but they were also looking for kind of that lower entry vehicle, something that was a little more 3D, kind of like looked a little bit kind of like games that they were kind of used to, and they were kind of looking for that. So, some of the community came forward and said, hey, like we really like what you have here. What do you think about, possibly maybe building a 3D game and doing something in 3D? And I said, yeah, I'm completely open to it. That's not a problem. That's not something that, is kind of like built over a weekend, I mean, the text adventure game, I think, maybe took like about 6 months to build. So it wasn't really, it wasn't really too hard, just done on weekends and nights. But the 3D game is a full, that's a full endeavor that requires a lot of talented people coming together, to make a game and put it together.
That's a
So,
whole different animal. A whole different animal.
yeah,
So wait,
absolutely.
before we keep going
Yeah.
on that, I have a quick question. For that
Yeah.
initial phase, like that 6 month period of putting together like the proof of concept 1.0 text base, did you do everything solo? Like you coded everything, you did all the graphics and the art, and you put together the game and the lore and the universe. You did all of that yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I did all that. I did all that myself. It's kind of like my background, kind of before getting into it. I have a very varied background in tech. So it's kind of like I can do coding, I can do infrastructure, I can do 3D graphics work, I can do kind of all this kind of different stuff. It just happened to be just kind of a melding of the talents, if you will, of kind of like putting all that stuff together. So in the old days, it was kind of like working with 3D Max, and so a lot of the 3D design stuff like came out of that, which has now transformed itself into Autodesk and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, doing ray trace rendering and all that kind of stuff in the early days, that I did all that work myself, as well as putting together the server infrastructure, the database to run the game, like all that stuff, plus getting into crypto. So, I had the wherewithal to know how to kind of set that all up and tie it in. At the time, it ran on the Bitcoin blockchain under Counterparty. So, I was able to kind of interface all that on my own. And yeah, I put it together by myself. Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. So like okay, so like let's say I woke up tomorrow and I was like, which I do frequently wake up, which is a good thing. But let's, wake up tomorrow and I'm like, all right, I have this game idea. Like, I'm not a programmer. I wouldn't, I mean, I can do some very makeshift graphic design on like another thing, like a program that I can like download an icon or download a file, and then I can, upload that somewhere else. But I don't have that skill set. So if I woke up and had that inkling to do that, I would need a team of other people to be able to execute on that. Even that 1.0 model that took you 6 months, like, it's almost impossible for me solo to do it. So for people who want to actually do that and get into it, I mean, what options do they have? Like option one, it seems to me, would be to learn all of those different things, in which case that would potentially take years to learn all of that to then get to the point where you could start effectively, or go build a team to do it. Or like, I mean, what are our options here? It seems like a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah. I mean, definitely building a game today requires a lot of different skills. You've got to be able to use those skills, not only, effectively, but efficiently as well. You've got to know what your weaknesses are and what your strengths are and play to those, right? So it's kind of like if you're an artist but you don't know coding, chances are that you're going to be able to kind of pick up some things here and there So it's kind of like you could probably get a little bit of a start, right? By just kind of like taking some entry classes for, the game design tools, and start going through like the tutorials and just trying it out. Because the game engines actually give you, they have kind of like a free model, which kind of like allows you to kind of like build something on your own without, spending a lot of money and investment into those tools, just to kind of give it a shot, play around with it, take some tutorials, see if it's in your wheelhouse or not. If it's not in your wheelhouse, then you definitely have to partner with somebody, right? And a lot of people like either know somebody or know how to find somebody. So a lot of times it's basically, you definitely have to, if you can't kind of like, make that leap and kind of like go either from artist into programming or from programming into artist, right? Then it's kind of like you got to find some people who can kind of like help you out on that, and luckily the crypto community is like full of a lot of really talented people, especially now that a lot of people that are getting into the space have a very, very completely different backgrounds, right? Music, science, art, programming, so it's like it's not that hard to actually find somebody to be able to join up at a team and start putting something like that together. So, first advice is, kind of like find out whether or not you have the skill sets to be able to do it. If you know already and you're like, no, 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 like I can't, I can't draw, I can't put stuff together, forget about it. But I'm an idea guy, right? If you're like the idea guy, chances are, a lot of idea people know a lot of other people. So it's kind of like, you just got to like go out into your network, find the artist who can start doing some of that stuff. So, find the developer who can kind of like dig into the game engine and get started a little bit, and it's just a matter of kind of putting all that together.
So when it comes to actually building that team, obviously what's important for a lot of people in cryptocurrency is the whole decentralized part, or and one of the things there for me that's most important is like being able to do stuff with people without the element of trust. Like you don't have to have trust, or at least you can minimize the amount of trust required to get stuff done, because trust is like the social lubricant that we need to actually accomplish things. So if you don't really know anybody, and or maybe you have a network, and so it's like a friend of a friend of a friend, like you've never worked together and you don't really know. So how would you, from your experience, like how would you even approach putting together that team in a way where if you're creating value, you get to capture some of that value, but you're also sharing that value with the other people who are creating it, and you're doing it in a way to where you're not leaving yourself exposed to just get absolutely, you know, absolutely destroyed, like from a financial perspective or a business perspective, or you know what I mean? Like, how would you go about
Sure.
and approach that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different ways, and like my own background also includes like some project management for IT enterprise. So it's kind of like I've got a little bit of that, I got a little bit of that skill set. If you don't have that skill set, you definitely need like some basic project management, kind of like to figure out how to get your ducks in a row. But yeah, it's kind of like trust plays a big part into when you're working with anybody. And really what you want to do is you want to, over time, you can kind of get an idea of kind of like the professionalism that you're looking for. People who are used to kind of working as contractors definitely have a lot of those skill sets, right? So they know they have requirements, they know they have to put out a deliverable, they know that they have to work on some kind of a schedule, right? So those are kind of like three like really key pieces right there. And then, you know, based on that, you can let it go a little bit to see what the first deliverable looks like, see if it meets your expectations and kind of aligns to your vision a little bit. But if it doesn't, then it's kind of like, okay, you've got to kind of be able to have the kind of personality and make that kind of decision where you're going to say, okay, I need somebody else because this particular thing isn't matching what I want. And it can happen. People have different skill sets. People have different ways of working. you've got to find what works for you in order to bring it all kind of together, and it just depends. Um, Definitely like things that can make things like really difficult is trying to like work with like really close friends or family. Sometimes that can get a little, that can get a little tough because, it starts raising issues where, like you, let's say you want a model of a pirate ship, right? And, your friend is, and, your friend's an artist. So you go, great, like, can you make this pirate ship in this, in Blender for me? And let's say your friend, he's a sketch artist, right? He's used to working in a 2D medium, right? He's used to doing, sketches in his journal, in black and white. And so, but your friend wants to help you out. So he's like, okay, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna give this a shot. I'm gonna try it. So he goes in, and all of a sudden your pirate ship looks like something that it's made out of like Lego, right? And you wanted like a realistic, like pirate ship, right? So you kind of got to, those are the kinds of situations that can come up, right? So it's kind of like, when working with people in this kind of space, whether it's game development or whether it's anything, right? You kind of got to know what you want, and what you can give going into it, and kind of what your expectation is, coming out of it. Sometimes you can tailor it down a little bit, right? I mean, let's say the pirate ship that you get is like, you had like this awesome, elegant thing in mind, and it's, what you get is good, but it's not like great, right? You got to kind of tailor your expectations on some things as well, because you're not always going to get exactly what's in your head, but you got to work with what you got sometimes, right? So there's a little bit of that in terms of like, what your budget can allow for, and things like that. Really talented 3D artists are extraordinarily expensive, right? Because they have a skill set that's very high in demand. They often work for AAA studios. Sometimes they do stuff on the side. So it's kind of like, sometimes you can get what you want, but you got to be willing to pay for it. If you're, yeah, absolutely. If you can't pay for it, so you got to lower your expectations. And so, kind of like game development is a little bit of that back and forth, right? Finding a solid team that you can work with, understanding what the requirements are, getting the deliverables, and packaging up together into something that is, presentable, that meets your requirements. May not always, meet your vision, but you can kind of meet in the middle somewhere and still have a fun, still have a fun game at the end of it.
I like that a lot. So what I'm hearing is just go for it and start, and like you have your expectations, and then you're going to work with people, and either they're going to meet or not meet your expectations. And if they do, keep working with them. If they don't, go to the next. And you're just going to make mistakes, you're going to learn, and eventually, if you stick with it long enough, enough perseverance, you will be able to move and progress towards some end goal, depending on what you're doing and how you set your goals, and your effectiveness. You may or may not reach a good goal, a good ending point, but you will get somewhere. You will move forward in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, it's perseverance. It's kind of like, there's, I think everybody kind of, realizes that, when you go into game development, it's something that, has a very high ideal. And, a lot of fantasies and dreams are kind of like built around that. Like, hey, I want to be a game developer. I want to, I've got a world in my head. I want to get it out. And I want to put it out there so people can, can journey through it. And, a lot of times making that happen, you go on a journey yourself, right? And you start meeting people, and, some people you're going to work great with, others you may not, but, there's definitely like, within the game development circles, you start finding people that then start sending you, their ArtStation portfolio or something like that. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, this person's really talented, and hey, they're in my budget. And then you start working with them, and all of a sudden, like, that person has worked with somebody else on another project who's done like sound engineering, and this other person has done something else with doing voiceovers.
And it
So all of
all
a sudden,
comes together.
It all starts coming together, and pretty soon, like, it kind of gels, and you end up with a game. But it definitely, it's a journey. Absolutely.
One thing I've always been a fan of is partnership and actually like giving people a piece of the pie, because that way you're all a lot like your interests are aligned. However, early in my career, I got burned because many times, hence why I've learned so much. But I got burned because I would give them a piece of the like I would give them a piece of the company instead of the product. So one thing I will say is you should have your own company and you should have your own business. You should have an LLC or whatever, not financial advice. Go talk to your attorneys and your financial advisors, blah, blah, blah. But definitely consider building an entity like an LLC, so that you have some protection, like your own corporate veil, if you will. And from there, you then want to go work with other people. And if you do want to partner with people, partner with them on a product level. So you can have a business that owns another business where that business that you own is the product. So you can divvy up pieces of the pie there, and it's not going to hurt you long term. Well, be safe, think it through, but you could take more risks there, and you could see like, okay, I may invest $100 in setting up an LLC. Fantastic. But then you can work together on that product. You could share pieces of the pie with the different people that you want to work with. And if it works out, great. But if it doesn't, you can just destroy that LLC, take what you've learned, take the progress you've made, and go to the next one and try it again. Don't give up the entity that is yours. That's like your HQ. Partner on the product level. That's just, a word of advice and caution to those people who are looking to go the partnership route, because a lot of people are, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a really good point, which is kind of like, at some point, whenever you start a new endeavor, there's something that is a hobby, and then something that takes on a commercial aspect and turns itself into a business. So it's kind of like, everybody kind of knows when they kind of get to that kind of threshold.
You feel
And
it.
so, yeah, if you're just making a game for you and your friends to play, and it's like, it's no, and you're just kind of like messing around or whatever, it's a completely different story than actually if you're going to make a commercial game and put it up for sale where you want people to buy it, and all of a sudden, it turns into a whole thing. But yeah, absolutely. I don't recommend that people start a company and then start giving away equity to a lot of people within that company right away without really knowing exactly everything that it's going to entail. Because what ends up happening is that as more people come in, it starts building the expectation that then everybody deserves to have an equity stake in it. And pretty soon your own equity that you own in your own business just continues just to get sharded away until eventually you are an employee working for other people, right?
Exactly.
Even though you started the business, and that's definitely something that you don't want to be in the situation of.
And some of the early people may stop contributing, but they still hold that, their own bags of equity in your business. But then a new person comes and you're like, damn, they're doing 7 times as much work as this other person, but the other person has the equity, so you can't afford to incentivize them how they should be incentivized when they come and start kicking ass. So that's a whole different rabbit hole, but just like something to think about is you don't have to actually give equity in your base company. You could do it in a product and just, add another layer there to protect yourself. So anyways, I want to jump way back out of this rabbit hole. So the community was like, hey, we want to take this to the next level from this text-based game. And you said to them,
so yeah, it's a good idea, let's do it. Within my history, I've worked for, Microsoft Studios, I've worked for 505 Games, did stuff for Bioware. So it's like, I definitely knew a lot of people in the gaming space. I knew a lot of people, in that arena, who have put together, AAA studio games and things like that. So kind of know the process, kind of know what's involved. And, at the same time, I was also kind of looking for, to see kind of what was going on, what was happening out there. So, I definitely, there's actually a game developers conference, which is called GDC. And they usually have a couple conferences a year. They haven't had any recently because of the pandemic. So, but yeah, when you go to these conferences, they have a lot of information about, all different sorts of things about how to strategize, what are the latest techniques in game development. And you're actually, talking with the people who are actually, building those AAA studio games, and they show you how they actually show you exactly how they put it together and how they do it. You can get a lot of information from that. But one of the things that I wanted to do is that I wanted to find others in the industry who are kind of, who I thought would probably be into, getting into blockchain gaming and things like that. It was just like way too early, right? It was just like, at the time, it was just like nobody was kind of in that space, which was, now we're starting to see, AAA studios interested in building a game and building blockchain games and NFTs. But back then, there's like nobody interested in it. What a lot of people really don't understand as well about this is that there are middle tier studio houses that actually work for the AAA studios that make these games. And a lot of these middle house studios, they do all sorts of different things, right? So they do model design. Some of them will focus on animation. Some of them will focus just on, different pieces of the game and things like that. And so finding one of these, kind of middle houses, something that I was interested in as well, because it was like, it was kind of like, okay, here's what I'm looking to do, what's out there in terms of like, who's working with who, who's available to do work and things like that. So in some cases, I actually had some middle house studios do some of the, asset work design for Age of Rust. So, that's obviously been helpful. But yeah, so, I mean, really, it was great feedback from the community to say, hey, like, let's go build a 3D game. And I was like, great, let's go do that. I think it'd be a lot of fun. I think it'll help further adoption by kind of lowering that barrier of entry to say, okay, what are people comfortable with? They're comfortable with kind of the look and feel of games that they see coming out of, coming out of studios and in the indie game area. And it's like, okay, well, let's do that. I think it'd be fun. So that's kind of like that's what started the ball rolling for putting kind of the formal Age of Rust game together.
And so, how long from that point did it take to actually develop it into that initial vision of like, hey, we're going from this text based to we want 3D and we want a game? Like, what was that time horizon?
It was about a year before we actually had a playable alpha. So, one of the
That's
things
pretty
that,
good though.
yeah, it's not bad. I mean, the alpha was the alpha test was basically another kind of proof of concept by saying, okay, are players gonna get this? Are they gonna kind of cement the two concepts together of gaming and blockchain? So at the time, Engine had released their first SDK, and so it was all proving that out a little bit with players, because this is kind of the first time where players are going to have a wallet on a mobile device. They're going to be linking it to the game, and they're going to be playing the game and getting stuff in their wallet. And how is that going to translate? How is that going to work? So it's kind of what the alpha test was primarily geared around. And so yeah, so it took about a year to get the, and then I showed up at the game developers conference the year after and had the game on the show floor where people who were at the conference could go and actually play the game.
What was the reception?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was kind of like I think Epic Games had the booth it was kind of like next to us, and people from Epic were coming over and playing the game because they thought it was pretty cool. So it was kind of interesting. I had Microsoft come by, had a bunch of different people come and check it out. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, everybody really liked it, and they kind of like it's one of those things like back then it was kind of like people weren't completely used to crypto being within the kind of like common language of everybody. I mean, people had heard of Bitcoin, but it was kind of like, it was still, it was still early. I mean, even though it was, even though this was like 2019, but it was still, it was still kind of, it was still making its way around, right? People were still kind of like getting comfortable with it. They weren't quite sure. And gamers, are very opinionated about crypto. And so it's kind of like, all of a sudden you have a mix of gamers and game developers looking at a game, looking at crypto, seeing those two worlds come first time. And some people, it clicks right away. They're like, oh my God, like this is, like this is the future of gaming. This is where it's gonna go,
Yep.
and so it's kind of like you've got to have that lights on moment, and it is really, really, really tough to kind of get that idea out there until somebody actually gives it a try for the first time and then they get it. But yeah, it's kind of like, getting that aha moment, I think, is key to it. But yeah, it was fun to kind of see that. It was fun to see that happen with folks.
That aha moment, that is such a beautiful thing. I mean, really, truly, when it clicked for me, it was like everything I'd ever done, it all came together, and it was like it showed me the path forward. And obviously it's crypto gaming. I started the Crypto Gaming Institute. Clearly I'm super
Right.
like biased and into it. But like it all comes together in this beautiful shining path of like, oh, it's magical. But there's so many layers that have to be built, like layers of almost like layers of context, the foundation that people have to like see and grasp before that aha moment can happen. And I actually think that's like the only thing that is stopping us. It's not stopping us, but it's like there's still a few road bumps along the way. It's like we're not driving on the super highway yet. We're kind of still migrating from the dirt road onto like a semi pavement-esque thing. It's getting weird now. I'm gonna go away from that. But like, what do you see now as how do we bridge people? Because they're starting to get it. People are still very confused. A lot of people in the industry still are confused. I feel like even the people that don't think they're confused, there's still some confusion. It's like it's just kind of chaos. It's a beautiful chaos. But like, how do we get to that next level of understanding where it's just commonplace? We get it. It's like, yes, this is it. We can now move on to like actually building and exploring it fully.
Yeah, I've got the I've got the worst answer for you. It's the answer nobody likes. It's time. It's kind of like it's unfortunately it's the same narrative that kind of like banks and Wall Street had with crypto back in like 2012, 2013, right? It was kind of like, oh no, this thing is like, this is bad, this is evil, we can't deal with it, but as time went on, as knowledge and information started to be shared within communities, right? It's kind of like the same thing. The same thing is starting to happen now. The community, obviously, that's into crypto, that's into NFTs, that's into gaming, is sharing this information. They're having conversations with people who are, anti-crypto, anti-NFT gaming, and they're saying, well, wait a minute, do you really understand what this is? And in a lot of cases it's no, but they're just they've got the narrative from the from the negative kind of cloud that's out there about about this, and they're kind of like, okay, but it's the same type of thing. Over time, we're just going to see that erode away as people really start to understand what the differences are. And even though the difference is very minimal in terms of like in terms of what an NFT looks like in a game versus what a non-NFT item looks like in a game, right? You can't tell the difference in the game because that's not where that's not where the change happens. So it's kind of like so it's like for that information to come out, unfortunately, it's time. And we're starting to see that now. What I think is going to really kind of like, break the levee will be when the first AAA studio games that come out have this, right? I have a feeling, I mean, I don't have any inside information on this or anything, but say in the next, like, 3 to 4 years, you'll see you'll see a game like Uncharted, or a game like Assassin's Creed, or things like that. Like, those are going to have NFTs in them, right? And it's kind of like, all of a sudden the players now are being exposed. They're being exposed to this on a much larger scale, right? And it's kind of like, oh well, I'm not going to use the NFT, but I'm going to play the game, and then all of a sudden their friend will be going, their friend will go, oh no, like you have the silver sword. It's an NFT. You're sitting on like $500. Like, what are you doing? It's like, well, I didn't claim the NFT because I'm not really NFT. So I mean, so it's like, so that conversation will, eventually start to erode the walls. And yeah, so I have a feeling, 1, 2, 3 AAA size games that kind of like, come into the industry that are, on the PlayStation, on Xbox, on console.
It'll
and it's
tip
just
us
gonna
over.
like, yeah, exactly.
So in that in that time span, and now I want to put on my investor hat. I don't have a hat around to do that with. I should get one of those. But put on my investor hat. So
Yeah.
if I'm like, okay, I know that this is happening. Like, once you drink the Kool-Aid, as much as I assume both of us have, had the Kool-Aid, like, it is the future. It is happening. It's just a matter of time. And it's gonna evolve from like gaming being the focus to like everybody's gonna do everything in the metaverse. It's like, to me, it's crystal clear, and it's just a matter of time. So from investor hat on, you want to invest in it as early as possible, because if you can, however much you can grab as early as, like, it's a land grab, and it's happening right now. And there are already people who are doing a fantastic job of setting themselves up to be the freaking overlords of the metaverse. Or maybe that's a bad word. I mean, Zuckerberg's definitely trying to be the overlord, and I don't really like that, but that's a whole different, that's a whole different conversation. But like, you want to invest in this, and you want to build your assets, you want to be ready to go. So how early are we really? And maybe think of it like a chart, like the Bitcoin chart, right? Like, are we at $100 Bitcoin right now? Are we at a $1 Bitcoin? Are we at a $10,000 Bitcoin? Like, where are we on the spectrum here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're probably at about a $70 like Bitcoin kind of level, with where we are in terms of like, where the industry is sitting at right now. The platforms are just starting. There's only a couple platforms where they're actually in production and they're actually being used, right, for blockchain gaming, because it's kind of like, that middle tier is really attractive, because you have game studios, and then you have platforms, and then you have the community and players, and then you have kind of, on the other side, you have indie game developers, right? I have a feeling that, that the studios are probably going to try to do what they always do in some cases, which is the walled garden approach. They're going to want to be able to control as much as possible that they possibly can, and that means either their own blockchain, or getting somebody else involved, on another larger blockchain and buying them, or however they manage it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, it is so early in terms of blockchain gaming. The only place that you could be maybe a little earlier is maybe a couple of years ago, which was the Stone Age, right? which is the 10,000 Bitcoins for the pizzas like era, right? And that
Yeah.
was like, that was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's like, I mean, it's still really, really, really early. And there's a lot of opportunity out there for people looking to get involved, and people looking to, get in on something, early, and there's a lot of platforms out there, to really look at, that have either tokens or, things like that, to, to start to begin to acquire. Absolutely.
Perfect. I feel like a lot of people have severe FOMO, especially the people who are, I'm hesitant to use the word sophisticated, but if you're sophisticated enough, or maybe even degenerate enough to have gotten to the point where you can, really put some serious capital into these different assets, I think it's sophistication. Just to go on the record there, I think if you're looking at it now and you seriously are considering this as like your investment vehicle for the future, you're actually fucking brilliant, and don't give up. Do not ever give up. Don't let anybody tell you to give up. You're here, you're correct. Believe in yourself, have conviction forever. They will be wrong, and they'll know that in like 3 years, and you know, you'll be laughing all the way to the bank like the fucking money tickles. Okay. That's a Lil Wayne quote, which I love. Anyways, so is like for people who really like have conviction, and they want to do this, and they're like, okay, starting now, I'm going to devote myself to studying this asset class and learning and investing and doing it right. Like, they're suffering from FOMO right now because they see the Zuckster. I mean, he's making stuff. Gary V's making content. People, there are a ton of influencers out there who are just using the word metaverse. Is it better, in your opinion, to get in it and start with a little bit, and you may get wrecked, you may not, but just to get into it, to start feeling your way around, just stumble on projects, fumble around, or should you wait for a dip, or like, what's your strategy for people to like get into it without getting without getting wrecked so hard that they get out of it forever?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple schools of thought there, right? And the first is kind of like, a lot of people have the mindset of, you know, you want to look for something that has kind of that has a reasonable market cap to get into to acquire a token, right? As well as a reasonable price in order to get in to start acquiring. By no means is this investment advice, but it's kind of like, you want to kind of like everything else, you want to try to get a good deal, so what a lot of people do is that they look for early projects to get involved in and to start acquiring, some tokens in some particular way, just to kind of like, just to get their feet wet, right? Just to understand the mechanics of it, just to understand the language, understand what people are doing. Like everybody says, in crypto, it's like you have to do your own research, and unfortunately that's time, but it's time well spent. And so, I think that people who go into it and they start to go out and they look to see what's early, something that they like, something that's interesting to them, then by all means, I recommend that people kind of like, dip that first toe into the water and kind of see what happens. There are people who actually have gone like overboard, like you said, they mortgaged their house and taken all that money and dumped it into some token that that didn't perform well and still isn't performing well, but they're still keeping the dream alive, right? So it's like you definitely have those people out there. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, if people are out there and they're looking to get into it and they want to know what kind of like where to start, I always recommend starting with Bitcoin. That's kind of the tried and true kind of method of getting into it, because you really start to learn, what the mechanics are. You start to learn about how to have, a safe wallet with, not your keys, not your coins. You really start kind of you start to build on top of that experience a little bit, and then you can kind of like see what's in the other room, which is, kind of like where all the tokens are that, as we've seen over the years, people put a little bit of money in and they acquire a lot of tokens. And then over the next couple of years, they see those tokens go up in value because of utilization or speculation or whatever have you. And then all of a sudden, they become wealthy by being early adopters of the technology, and getting in early. So yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something that people have done. and it's worked out well for a lot of people. But yeah, absolutely. You gotta do your research. You gotta look to see what's out there. You gotta look to see what's happening. And there's obviously a trend that's happening right now, right? Which is kind of like, so it's kind of like you gotta everybody sometimes goes along with the trend and whatever that is. They buy low and they sell high and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, you gotta know what you're looking at. You've got to learn the language, and you've got to decide what's good for you, not what somebody else tells you that's good for you.
I love that. That's actually a really good answer, because even people that like know me IRL that have no idea anything past just the word crypto, they're like, "Hey, how do I get in it?" And like, I so desperately want them to get in it because I don't want them to miss out. But I don't want them. I don't want to be like, "Okay, take steps 1, 2, 3," because if they do and they get wrecked on spawn, all pun intended, then I mean, they're out. And I just burned somebody who I care about indirectly. And maybe, they didn't do it right, or they caught it on the wrong day, or just some random shit happened, but they got wrecked and they're like, I'm scared of it now. Well, we just lost a market participant that could have been a very productive member of the ecosystem. So that was a really good answer. I'm definitely going to borrow some of that language to talk to other people. I've had so much fun with this interview, and I want to be very respectful of your time. I know we're going definitely way over time right now. So I want to just kind of catch us up to where you are with your projects right now. I want to ask one question about the future of the metaverse, and then we'll wrap it on up here. And I'm very appreciative thus far of everything you've shared.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, the next stages of where we are with the project, specifically for Age of Rust, is basically, we got removed from Steam because Steam was anti-game, anti-blockchain, anti-NFT.
Idiots.
So we're in the process of finding. Yeah, I know. It's like what? But it's like, okay. So yeah, so we're in the process now of finding a new home for we'll launch on something that's obviously very blockchain friendly. And we've had a lot of people reach out to us. So we're definitely going to have another partner for for where people can get a hold of the game. So that's kind of like one of the things. And then the other thing is that we have this process that we're going through right now on the backside, which is basically has a lot to do with we're shifting away from Ethereum mainnet onto Engine's JumpNet and Affinity, which basically lowers the gas fee. So for people who don't know, sending a token right now is very expensive because the utilization on mainnet is very high. A lot of people want their transactions to go through fast. They're willing to pay more. Gas is up, which costs money. But on JumpNet, transactions are actually free. So people are going to be able to trade the tokens around, and we're going to be able to send tokens to players without having to pay a significant amount of money to do it. So that's kind of what's next in terms of the project. And the game is going to be out. We carved the game up into seasons. So there's 3 seasons for the game. Season 1 and Season 2 are now both going to be out in 2022. So I know a lot of people are looking forward to that. So it'll be good. It'll be a really good launch.
That is really, really, really exciting. And yes, everybody, you got to go check it out. I still have that last question for you, but where are people going to go to really like get the full experience? Like, what's the starting point, and then how do we on ramp into this whole world, your world, your metaverse?
You mean specifically for like Age of Rust, or you just mean like the metaverse, like kind of in general, and blockchain gaming in general?
No, your metaverse, because there's, you have a whole world, an ecosystem, a community. Like, how do we get involved and get started?
Yeah, definitely. So, a lot of people actually come like, into kind of our experience, like through Twitter. This crypto Twitter is like, it's definitely very big and very happening. So a lot of people start off coming through on our Twitter, and then they end up kind of like going into our Discord, and some of them make it over to our website. But there's definitely a lot of stuff that we do in Discord. So, we have giveaways for our NFTs. And we post stuff all the time to Twitter. or screenshots and inside information and everything like that about the game. So I definitely recommend everybody like start off at Twitter and then kind of like come into our Discord for that kind of next level kind of experience.
I love it. I love it. So, last question for you. Actually, I have two more questions for you, but I have heard so many predictions of what the metaverse is going to be like. I really think the only common thread between everybody that I've asked this is that they've said it's going to be very, very strange. I thought that was really funny. But what do you actually think it's going to look like end game for the metaverse?
I think we're probably going to see several stages of what the metaverse actually looks like. And I think the first stage is probably not exactly what everybody has in mind in terms of a metaverse. I think what's going to happen is basically you're going to have several properties working together to basically come together and provide an experience. So it's going to be something like, let's just say, Microsoft working with McDonald's or something like that, right? And so you're going to have this thing where you're going to have this, you're going to have this like, Xbox game, and then you've got like, these digital assets, and maybe some of them are generated by McDonald's, and you're going to see like content for that like show up, so it's going to be a little, it's going to be a little weird. And so I think like what's going to happen is it's going to start at the commercial end, which unfortunately not a lot of people are very interested in, right? But big companies and corporations always think that people are interested in having that kind of experience, and unfortunately they're not, right? But what it's going to do is it's going to kind of like fuel what's going to be kind of the underground movement of what essentially the metaverse is actually going to eventually become, which is people working together kind of behind the scenes and underground, and kind of like making this come together so that you can actually like have your like matrix avatar, right, go in and play like a Assassin's Creed, right? Because that's kind of where people want to go with it. That's what they want to. That's what they want to do. When they move from property to property to property, they want that experience to travel like with them, and they kind of want the environment to kind of like have some response in some particular way. And unfortunately, corporations aren't going to be the place where that's going to start, because a lot of corporations are looking to protect what they've developed over the past 30 years, building their multi-billion-dollar studios doing, which is protecting their intellectual property, right? As a major studio, you're not going to want to see your property show up in somebody's indie game, right? Where they're basically using something that you spent 10 years building, and they're going to be doing whatever with it, right? So it's kind of like, it's going to be like that kind of a transition. But what the blockchain does is the blockchain's kind of like biggest strength is that it provides decentralization, right? And the metaverse is going to be fueled on that decentralization, because it's going to be something that the corporations and other individuals that are looking to kind of build these walled gardens, it's not going to work, right? And so it's kind of like you're going to start to see that decentralization kind of start to infiltrate and start to infect what essentially becomes all these properties. And it's going to be like these corporations aren't going to like it, but it's going to be something kind of like a Fortnite-y kind of thing, where it's kind of like, well, this is happening and this is coming whether or not we want to do anything or not. This is what players are interested in. We want to build this kind of experience for them, but they want this other experience, right? They want this, they want to wear a moon hat and, and run around and shoot a bazooka from, another game. So it's kind of like, it's going to kind of go into that kind of area. And so I have a feeling that these large studios and these properties like Facebook and Microsoft and all these others, they're just going to kind of go with it. even though they really don't have a choice, because it's not going to be worth their effort to go in and try to fight a centralized battle on a decentralized playing field, right? They're not gonna win. It's just not gonna happen. So I think they're just gonna kind of take a back seat for it, and that's where you're gonna start to see it really evolve into the next levels, and then it'll start to become more mature. But yeah, I kind of think we're gonna see kind of those three phases. We're gonna see kind of the weird marketing stuff that really nobody's kind of interested in. Then we'll see it with the grassroots effort, and that's where it's really going to start to take off. So I think that'll eventually happen, but it's going to take some time.
Well, I think that's both good and bad. It gives us the time to bet on the horses we want to bet on as investors. It gives us the time to be a part of the ecosystem that's being built as gamers or business people. If you want to get in it, get in it. This is, this is the wild, wild west. This is a startup season. So you can get in somewhere and be a part of something really, really cool at the ground level. So I think there are pros and cons to that, but it's definitely coming. You got to be prepared. You don't want to miss out on this. This is like it's like if you've been looking for your thing that can be yours, that you can say, hey, I saw this coming from a mile away and I got into it and I kicked ass and it was a amazing journey and I built a lot of friends and I had the experience of a lifetime. And now 20 years later, we're here and it's amazing. Like, this is your chance right now. If you're looking for a sign, this is it. This is it. So don't hesitate. Don't be afraid. Be cautious. Be smart. But get into it. Just start. Because the only thing that you're really going to regret later on is not starting sooner. That's all I have to say. Chris, thank you so much. You're the best. I'm so grateful for all the time that you've shared with me, with the audience. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I had a great time. Well, thank you.
Awesome. You're the man. Everybody else, game on. I will see y'all on the next episode. Y'all totally rock. I love y'all. And yeah, have a great day.